There is a room beneath Holyrood Palace that does not appear on any tour. It is not grand. It has no portraits, no gilt, no soft Edinburgh light coming through tall windows. It has a low ceiling, a smell of paper and machine oil, and a brass pneumatic tube in the corner that has been swallowing messages and spitting them back since before anyone now living was born. I worked in that room for 11 years. My name does not matter to this story. I was a records clerk. My whole job was to make sure that what the palace said had happened and what had actually happened were the same thing. For 11 years, they almost always were. This is about the time they weren't. It started with a card. The pneumatic tube in the corner of the Annex A was old. Everyone said it should have been ripped out decades ago and replaced with something electric, something quiet. Nobody ever did it. The palace is like that. It keeps things long after they stop working because removing them feels like a decision, and nobody wants to be the one who made it. The tube jammed roughly twice a week. When it jammed, it made a sound like a man clearing his throat in the next room, and then it coughed a brass canister back out onto the receiving tray with a flat little clack. You learn to ignore it. You learn the way you learn to ignore a clock. On a Tuesday in early autumn, it coughed a canister back at me, and inside was a visitor card I did not recognize. It was an old card, the kind we had stopped using years before, thicker stock, a faded blue rule down the left edge, a box in the corner for a clearance stamp that newer cards didn't have. Somebody had filed it decades ago, and somebody had pulled it. And now the tube was handing it to me as if it had been waiting for me specifically. The name on it was Eleanor Vaughn. The appointment date was a Thursday. The clearance box was stamped. The handwriting was small and careful. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a perfectly ordinary card, and I should have sent it back down the tube and forgotten it. But I had a tidy mind, and a tidy mind notices when two things that should match don't. I had seen the name Eleanor Vaughn that same morning. It was in the duty log, the big bound book where the guard detail recorded who they had escorted and when. I'd been checking the log for something unrelated. Eleanor Vaughn had been escorted on a Monday, not a Thursday. A Monday, 2 days off the card in my hand, a clerical slip. That's all it was. People write the wrong day all the time. I told myself that, and I almost believed it. And then, because I had nothing better to do, and because the tube had already coughed twice that morning and put me in a mood, I went and checked the visitor ledger as well. The visitor ledger is a separate book, different desk, different clerk, different purpose. It records who came through the East Gate and what they looked like, in case anyone ever needs to be matched to a description later. It is dull work, and the descriptions are dull: height, build, hair, anything notable. Eleanor Vaughn was in the visitor ledger too. She had come through the East Gate on a Wednesday. Not Monday, not Thursday, Wednesday, and the description did not match the one detail the duty log had bothered to record. The duty log said the woman the guards escorted had been tall. The visitor ledger said the woman who came through the gate had been of average height and had walked with a slight favor to one leg, 3 books. 3 days, two different women, at least wearing the same name. I sat with the card in my hand for a long time. The tube cleared its throat in the corner and said nothing else. I did the correct thing. I wrote it up, a short, careful note, flagging the discrepancy across 3 records, recommending it be reviewed. I sent it up the line the way you're supposed to, and I went home, and I did not think about it very much because I assumed someone above me would look at it, frown the way I had frowned, and sort it out. The next morning, the note came back down the tube. There was a single line written across the bottom of it in pencil in a hand I didn't know. Close this, not a discrepancy, filing variance only, filing variance. I had been a records clerk for 11 years, and I had never once heard that phrase. It was the kind of phrase that sounds official precisely because it means nothing. I should have closed it. That was the instruction, and the instruction was clear, and I was not a brave man. I want to be honest about that. I was not a man who went looking for trouble. I was a man who liked his desk and his tea and his tidy books, but the tube coughed again at 10:30, and when I cleared the jam, the brass canister was empty except for one thing. The card, Eleanor Vaughn, Thursday, the same card I had sent down the day before. It had come back on its own. I'm not a superstitious man. Machines jam, cards get misrouted. There's always an explanation, and the explanation is almost always boring. But I stopped telling myself it was a filing variance, and I started very quietly to pay attention. Sergeant Ian Marsh did not want the detail. He told me this later, when all of it was over and we were two men with no reason to lie to each other. At the time, he didn't tell me anything. At the time, he was just a name in the duty roster in a tall, square shape that moved through the lower corridors twice a day with the particular straightness of a man who had spent 20 years being looked at by tourists and had decided long ago that the simplest response to being looked at was to give them nothing. The order he got was strange, and he knew it was strange, and he took it anyway because that was also the job. A single visitor, Eastgate, 2:30. Escort her along the lower corridor to the small reading room at the end. The sealed one, the one with the heavy door that was usually locked and usually empty. Wait outside, escort her back at 4. No log entry, no record of the movement, no questions to the visitor, and none to him. Marsh had escorted a great many people in 20 years. He had escorted ambassadors and inspectors, and a man who turned out to be a journalist, and a woman who turned out to be nobody at all. He had a soldier's instinct for the shape of an order, the way you can feel the weight of a box before you lift it just by how someone hands it to you. This one was light in the hand and heavy underneath, and he did not like that, and he did it anyway. He met her at the east gate at 28 minutes past 2. He told me this part carefully because he wanted me to understand how wrong he had been. He expected someone difficult. The whole shape of the order said difficult. No log, no questions, a sealed room. That was the paperwork of a problem. He had built a picture of her before he saw her, the way you do, and the picture had sharp edges. The woman at the east gate had no sharp edges at all. She was somewhere past 60. Average height, she wore a gray coat that had been good once and was still cared for. She had a cloth bag over one shoulder, the soft kind, nearly empty by the way it hung. When she walked toward him, she favored her left leg, very slightly. The way you do when an old injury has become less a pain than a habit. She said, "You'll be the one taking me down," then not a question. Her voice was low and even and entirely without fear. And that was the first thing that troubled him, because everyone is a little afraid at a palace gate, everyone, even the ones who hide it well, and she wasn't hiding it. There was nothing to hide. She simply wasn't afraid. He said, "This way, ma'am." She fell into step beside him. The favor in her leg meant she walked just slightly slower than his natural pace. And without thinking about it, he shortened his stride to match hers, the way you do for someone older, and she noticed him do it, and she said, "Thank you," very quietly for a thing most people wouldn't have named. They went down. The corridor under Holyrood is long and plain and lit by lights that buzz when they are about to go and don't get changed until they do. Their footsteps were the only sound, hers soft his, measured the buzz of one bad light near the turn. Halfway along, she said, conversationally, the way you'd remark on weather, "You've been told not to ask me anything." Marsh said nothing, which was an answer. "That's the right thing to do," she said. "Don't ask me anything. It's easier for you." She wasn't being unkind. She said it the way you'd tell someone to mind a wet step. They reached the door at the end. It was heavy and old, and the lock was the kind that takes a key the size of a hand. He had the key. He let her in. The room beyond was small, a table, two chairs, a lamp, and against the far wall, a single gray box file that someone had set out on the table before they arrived, squared neatly to the edge, waiting for her. She looked at the box for a moment and did not move toward it. Then she said, without turning around, "You can wait outside. I won't be long. I've read it before." He stepped out. He pulled the heavy door to, but he did not let it latch all the way, and afterward he could not entirely tell you why, except that 20 years of instinct had told him that a light order with the heavy underneath is the kind of order you keep one eye on. He stood in the corridor. The bad light buzzed. And he found that he was thinking, against all his training, about the duty log, about the fact that he had been told not to make an entry, that there would be no record that he had ever walked this woman down this corridor at all, and that this had never happened to him before in 20 years. Not once, not for anyone. I found him there. I had not gone looking for Marsh. I had gone looking for the duty log because the card had come back up the tube a third time, and I had stopped pretending and started in my quiet way to dig. I had the duty log under my arm and the visitor ledger under the other, and a photostat of an old medical register page folded in my pocket. And I came around the turn in the lower corridor, and there was a royal guard standing outside a sealed door doing nothing at all, which is a thing royal guards are very good at, and a thing that in that particular corridor on that particular afternoon made the hair on my arms stand up. We looked at each other. He was not supposed to ask me why I was there. I was not supposed to ask him why he was. For a moment, we both observed our respective rules and said nothing. Two careful men in a corridor, and then I, because the card had come back 3 times, and I was tired of being careful, held up the books and said, "Eleanor Vaughan." Something moved in his face, not much. He was a man who gave you nothing by long practice. But I had spent 11 years reading the small marks people leave on paper without meaning to. And a face is just another kind of record. "She's in there," he said. "I know," I said. "I want to show you something before she comes out." I should not have. He should not have let me. But there's a particular loneliness in being the only person who has noticed that something is wrong And when you meet the only other person who has noticed it, you do reckless things like spread 3 official books open on the cold floor of a corridor under a buzzing light and say, look. So I showed him the duty log Eleanor Vaughn escorted on a Monday, described in the one line the guard on that detail had bothered to add, as tall, dark-haired, in her 40s. The visitor ledger, Eleanor Vaughn through the East Gate on a Wednesday, average height, a favor to one leg, hair going gray. The medical register, the photostat from my pocket, an old page from a book the palace kept for anyone who was ever treated by the duty physician on the grounds. Eleanor Vaughn, seen on a Thursday, the same Thursday that was stamped on the card the tube would not keep, described as small, fair, perhaps 30, with a note in the margin in the old physician's hand that I had read 40 times and could not stop reading. It said, patient calm, ask that no surname be entered, surname entered on instruction, on instruction. Marsh crouched over the books for a long time. He was not a man who read documents for a living, and I watched him do the thing that people who don't read documents for a living do, which is read them too literally, as if the words were the truth instead of a report of it. 3 women, he said, or 1. I said, recorded as 3. That's not possible. It's not possible by accident. I said, that's the part I keep getting stuck on. 1 book wrong is a clerk having a bad day. 2 books wrong is a coincidence. 3 books wrong, in 3 different hands, in 3 different years, all under one name, all wrong in different directions. I stopped. I had said it out loud now, and it was worse out loud. That's not error. Error is random. This is shaped. It was then that Mr. Cawley came down the corridor. I want to describe Cawley accurately because the easy thing, the shape of this story wants me to do is to make him sinister. And he wasn't. Not in any way you could point at. He was a mild man. He was somewhere in his 50s, soft-spoken, slightly stooped, the sort of man who has worked inside an institution so long that he has taken on its shape the way water takes the shape of the jug. He was from the registry. The registry was the office that sat above all the books, above my annexy, above the duty log, above everything, and made sure that what the palace said had happened, stayed, said. He did not raise his voice. He never, in the whole of it, raised his voice. He looked at the 3 books open on the floor, and at me, crouched over them, and at the sergeant, and he sighed, not angrily, almost fondly, the way you sigh at a thing you have seen before, and hoped not to see again. Ah, he said, you found the Vaughn file? I found 3 of them. I said, you found 1 file? Cawley said gently, recorded with some variance. It happens more than you'd think in old records. Different clerks, different decades. Memory is a poor instrument, and a guard at a gate is not paid to be a portraitist. He smiled at Marsh when he said it to take the sting out, and Marsh did not smile back. It looks dramatic on a cold floor under a bad light. In daylight, it's a tidying job, an afternoon's work. We close the variance, we agree on one version, and the books are quiet again. Which version? I said. Cawley looked at me. It was the first moment, the only moment really, that I saw the thing underneath the mildness, and it was not cruelty. It was tiredness. He was very tired. Whichever version, he said, is least like her, and he turned and went back up the corridor, unhurried, and left that sentence behind him on the floor with the books, and I crouched there, understanding slowly, the way you understand a cold morning, that the discrepancy was not the mistake. The discrepancy was the protection. The reading room door opened. Eleanor Vaughn came out the way she had gone in, unhurried, the gray coat, the favor to her leg, the soft bag now flat against her side. She had not taken anything from the box file. She had only, I understood later, gone to confirm that it was still there, and still wrong, and still hers. She looked at the 3 books on the floor. She looked at me and at Marsh, and she did not look afraid. And I finally understood why she had never once looked afraid, all the way down the corridor and all the way through this, and the understanding sat in my chest like a stone. She wasn't afraid because she had done this before. Not the visit, the being found. She had been almost found, I think, more than once across more years than I had been alive, and every time the institution had done exactly what Cawley had just described, agreed on a version, tidied the variance, and the variance had grown back, because someone, somewhere, decades ago, had built it to grow back. You've been reading about me, she said, not unkindly. I've been reading 3 women, I said. I think they're you. They are, she said, and they aren't. That's the point of them. She sat down without asking in one of the corridor chairs that nobody ever sat in, and she favored her leg as she did it. And she told us, not all of it, she never told anyone all of it. That was the discipline that had kept her alive, but enough. A long time ago, she had seen something. It does not matter for this story what. People always want the what, and the what is never the part that matters. What matters is that she had seen it and that telling the truth about it had been the correct thing to do, and that she had done the correct thing, and that doing the correct thing had made her a person it was useful to certain people to find. So the palace, not the palace of portraits and tours, the other one, the one made of books and tubes and quiet men from the registry, had done something for her that the books were never designed to do. It had lied about her on purpose in three directions at once. It had made her tall in one book and small in another and the wrong age in a third. It had given her one Thursday and one Monday and one Wednesday. It had taken the single most dangerous thing about her, a fixed, findable identity, and it had broken it into pieces and scattered the pieces across decades of paper, so that anyone who came looking would find three women and never be sure which, if any, was real. The discrepancy I had flagged so dutifully, so tidily, the discrepancy I had written up and sent up the tube, that was the wall around her. And my note, my careful, correct 11 years of good work note, had asked, in effect, for the wall to be taken down, so the books could be neat. You did the right thing. Eleanor Vaughan said to me when she saw my face, do whatever it did. By your rules, you did exactly the right thing. That's what makes your rules dangerous to me. They're good rules. They're built to find the truth. I'm a person the truth gets killed for. The bad light buzzed, and now she said Mr. Colley will offer the sergeant a very reasonable thing. Colley came back. He came back the way mild men always come back to a problem they have decided is solvable, calmly, with the air of someone bringing the matter to a sensible close, holding nothing but a single sheet of paper and a pen. He did not look at Eleanor. I noticed that in the whole time, he never once spoke to her directly. And I think now it was not coldness. I think he had spent so many years protecting an abstraction called the file that he could not afford to look at the woman the file was made of. It is easier to tidy a record than to tidy a person. People are not improved by being made consistent. He spoke to Marsh because Marsh was the one with the order, and an order is a thing the registry understands. Surgeon. Colley said, this is simpler than it has been made to look. There's a discrepancy across three records. A discrepancy is an untidiness, and an untidiness left alone is an invitation to the next clerk, the next inspector, the next person who pulls a thread because pulling threads is their job. He did not look at me when he said the next clerk, which was its own kind of looking at me. All I require is a certification. You escorted a visitor today. You will state on this sheet a single accurate description of that visitor. One height, one account, one truth, signed by a man whose word the registry trusts. We attach it to the file, we set the other two versions aside as superseded, and the record agrees with itself again. That's all. One honest sentence from an honest man, and the matter closes. It was, as Eleanor had said, a very reasonable thing. That was what made it terrible. It was not a bribe and it was not a threat. It was an appeal to exactly the virtue Marsh had built his whole life on: accuracy. Plainness, the soldier's habit of saying the true thing in the fewest words. Colley was not asking him to lie. He was asking him to tell the truth. One honest sentence. The visitor was of average height, perhaps 65, with a favor to her left leg. Every word of it true, every word of it a key that fit the lock around her life, because the moment one version was certified true by a trustworthy man, the other two became false. And the day they became false, they stopped being a wall. They became, instead, a finger pointing at the one description that was real, hers, signed and dated and reliable. Exactly the fixed, findable thing the whole scattered architecture of those books had spent decades preventing. Marsh understood it. I watched him understand it. He was not a fast man with paper, but he was not a stupid man with consequences. And he stood in that corridor under that buzzing light and worked it through to the end, the way he would have worked through a route or a risk and arrived where I had arrived. That the honest sentence and the safe one were not the same sentence, and that he was being asked to choose. Colley held out the pen. It's only a description, Sergeant, he said mildly. You're not deciding anything. You're recording what you saw. That's the whole of your job. And Marsh said, I remember it exactly, because it was the plainest thing anyone said in that whole corridor, and the bravest, and it came out flat and unhurried, the way he said everything. No, my job is who I walk down here. Not the book about her. He did not take the pen. Colley did not move for a moment. Then he lowered his hand, and the tiredness I had seen earlier came back over his face. And it was not anger. It was something closer to recognition. I have wondered since whether Colley wanted to be refused. Whether a man who has spent 30 years keeping a kind lie alive grows weary of being the only one who knows it is kind and is somewhere underneath the mildness. Glad when someone else picks up the weight. You understand, Colley said quietly that the variants will remain, that the books will not agree. That for as long as that file exists, it will be wrong in three directions. And one day another careful clerk, and now he did look at me, will find it and write it up, and we will all be standing in this corridor again, having this conversation with different faces. Then we'll have it again, Marsh said. There was a silence. The light buzzed. Then Colley did the thing I least expected, the thing that told me he had never, in all of it, been the threat. He took the single sheet of paper, the certification, the clean, honest sentence that would have ended her, and he folded it once and he put it in his own pocket. And he said to no one in particular, then I'll note that the visit produced no certifiable description, filing variants only. And he turned and went back up the corridor, slow, stooped, and was gone. I picked the three books up off the floor. I closed them. I did not write Eleanor Vaughan up again. She left the way she had come. Marsh walked her back along the lower corridor to the east gate, and once again, without thinking about it, he shortened his stride to her slower one. And once again she noticed, and this time she didn't thank him, because by then there was nothing that small left between them to name. At the gate she stopped. She looked at him for a moment, the gray coat, the flat soft bag, the favor in her leg that one of three books had got right, and two had got deliberately wrong. You'll forget my face, she said. It was not a request. It was almost a kindness she was doing him. Within a week, you won't be able to picture it. People can't. With me, I've made sure of it for 40 years. She paused. That's the safest thing you can do for me. Be a bad witness. Marsh, and he told me this himself later, and I believed him because he was not a man given to inventing tender things. Marsh said, I'll forget your face. I won't forget, I walked you. She went out through the east gate into the ordinary Edinburgh afternoon, average height, slightly favoring one leg, recorded in the duty log as tall, in the visitor ledger as average, in the medical register as small and fair and 30 years old, and in no book anywhere as the woman who had actually just walked through that gate, which was the entire point, and which was that day allowed to remain the point. I went back down to the annexa. The tube was in its corner. The card was on the receiving tray where it had coughed itself up for the third time that morning. Eleanor Vaughan, Thursday. The clearance box stamped in faded blue. I picked it up. I held it for a while. Then I did the thing I had been refusing to do for 3 days, which was the simplest thing, the thing the